all of these things merging, I hate to quote Malcolm Gladwell, but at a tipping point. What you see at a tipping point is all things emerging and then hitting a crossroad. And then when it hits the tipping point, it falls back on the backside of that scale, and it's unrecoverable. I feel like we're at that moment. And the further and closer we get to the election cycle, I think it's 75% of Democrats said when polled that if Trump won, they wouldn't believe the results of the election. That probably is exactly the same on the other side, if not more. So no matter what, we have a massive mistrust of government, of institution, and then no matter what happens at the election cycle, that's not the pinnacle. That's not the crossroad. In fact, that might be the start point of this disaster.
And what's up, Utah? Welcome back to We Are the People Radio. This is your host, Jason Preston, and again with the beautiful bride. What's up, baby?
Don't ask me how I'm doing.
She's doing great. She's doing great. She's back on the show, which we're pumped.
Yeah.
We got through a month of hell, didn't we?
Yeah, I was going to say, don't ask me how I'm doing unless you want an honest answer.
Well, but she's doing better. So,
you know, the only thing I can compare these times to is 2019. I think a lot of people went through in 2019 before COVID really hit. And I feel like there's this spiritual warfare kind of going on. A lot of people we've spoken to have kind of been going through it.
Everybody's going through it right now. It is crazy. And I think you're right. I think there is a storm on the horizon. I think that we are in deep, deep spiritual warfare for people to be either they're getting stronger and prepared or they're falling apart. And but I think there's definitely... the universe is mixing it up for us.
Yeah. So if you're out there and you're struggling, you're going through it, just know you're not alone. This too shall pass.
We'll send our prayers to you too, because we appreciate you guys and your support.
No, I do appreciate it.
So we are pumped today. We have someone coming on the show that honestly, when we started doing this podcast, we've been doing this for well over a year now, actually close to coming up on 2 years. Mm-hmm. And there was actually someone that early on was on my list to get on this show because I believe he's so pivotal to what's going on in this country, and he happens to live here in Utah. Yeah. And so I've been very excited about him, and we're going to introduce him in just a minute. But first, just please make sure you're following us on our socials. And when those socials get taken down again, if you go to our website and subscribe, we will send out, and we are sending out a newsletter after every show so that way you can get it there too. That being said, introduce our guest.
Do we have any sponsors for today?
Patriot Punch, but we'll do that with our guest.
Okay, that would be fun. Haven't done that in a minute. Well, I am honored today to introduce our star guest today, the one and only Mike Glover. He is the founder and CEO of Fieldcraft Survival. Mike spent 18 years in the U.S. Army and as a government contractor for OGA. He served as SGM in Special Forces. I'm probably butchering this because that's Sergeant Major. I'm sure. Okay, thank you. I'm really glad I caught up with the times here. So he served as a Sergeant Major in Special Forces in various positions and deployed multiple times to combat theaters. He's an expert in counterterrorism, security, and crisis management operations and is the host of Fieldcraft Survival podcast on iTunes and SoundCloud. He is an avid outdoorsman, overland enthusiast, traveler, and hunter. He has a bachelor's degree in Homeland Security and resides in Heber, Utah, good old Heber, where he is the CEO of Fieldcraft Survival. Welcome to the show, Mike.
Thanks for having me, guys.
Yeah, great to be here.
We're pumped. Former Green Beret, our son-in-law, is getting ready to go to selection.
Oh,
to
awesome.
Be a Green Beret. So he's a big fan of yours. And,
really cool.
Yeah.
So that's where the badasses go, right? Green Berets.
I think so. I don't know. None of those guys would tell you they're badass. Neither will I. But they're good dudes. I serve with a lot of good human beings, and all over special operations from all the services, but I have an affinity for Green Berets.
Yeah. And so what distinguishes Green Beret from any other soldier and rank in the Army?
Yeah, it's a good
That is
question.
the right question.
Yeah, I mean, Green Berets get their heritage from the Office of Strategic Services. Post the war, there was a split up where basically the origins of the CIA come from OSS history in World War II. And also at the same time, Special Forces as a command was created. And the concept for Green Berets is basically what's called foreign internal. It basically working with indigenous forces. I don't want to bother or bore people with acronyms, but when you're doing training behind the enemy lines, sometimes in war, building rapport with indigenous forces, and by, with, and through operating with them, you have more influence because you have the ability to affect diplomatically, also tactically and strategically what's going on the battlefield. So foreign internal defense is the coined term for the acronym of what we specialize in. But we also specialize in counterterrorism, hostage rescue, special reconnaissance, counterproliferation. The list goes on. A whole bunch of fancy stuff. I would say what most signifies the Green Berets over really anybody else is their ability to adapt, blend in, and also work with indigenous elements overseas. And, I've drinking chai with Taliban commanders. I've ridden horses in Afghanistan. I've done all of that as a Green Beret. And it's very different as a mission set that a lot of special operations or operators specialize in.
Yeah, one of the things that they do is they basically assist in overthrowing governments.
That's true. Unconventional warfare,
Yeah.
irregular warfare. We're taught in the schoolhouse academically how to do that. And then we go through phased operations and unconventional warfare planning and execution of operations. It's really cool. There's a whole bunch to it. It's a 2-year pipeline. You learn a foreign language based on where you're going to specialize in the area of operation, the environment, and you have a specialty. So there's 4 different major specialties in Special Forces. You do a lot of cross training, and a team of 12 operational detachment alpha guys have the ability to influence an entire outcome of strategic warfare. So it's a real cool job.
Well, I say let's have a toast.
Yeah, toast to that.
Yeah.
So
Patriot Punch. By the way, if you want to support us, obviously you can grab a shirt or Patriot Punch, awesome energy drink. So cheers to freaking having Mike Glover.
Cheers.
Boom.
Thanks, guys.
The man, the myth, the legend. Let's go.
Oh, that's good.
It's good, right?
It goes down easy.
Yeah. It's solid. Like I said, we've been through them all.
So really quickly, just since, that was a great introduction for you, and you're, I'm sure we haven't even scratched the surface with what you've done with the Green Berets. I take it your time in tours overseas have come to an end, but you've been seeing what's happened to our military in the last, few years with the wokeness that's infiltrated the military. What is your thoughts on that? How insidious is the wokeness that's affecting not just society, but also the military right now?
Yeah, it's crippling the morale of troops. I talk to a lot of guys who, even peers of mine, who are still serving in very senior positions. And the overall morale of the force, especially with the lower enlisted, that's enlisted, which is E1 through E9, they're really being affected. It started with the pandemic, where they were forced to take the vaccination, and if they didn't, even with religious convictions, they were pushed out of the military. A lot of those that decided to take it, even regretting it, had to deal with that loss because they compromised their integrity, which is one of the Army values that they ingrain in you. And so it really crippled morale. Retention's hurting. Sustaining the force is hurting to keep the guys in. And recruitment is at an all-time low. I mean, we haven't seen the numbers since the 1960s and 70s of Vietnam, where we were post-draft. And so I think it's a larger issue, especially when it comes to not having the right people volunteering for the right positions at the tip of the spear, which are the most dangerous positions, the people who go in harm's way in combat arms. And that's scary because our national security is certainly compromised because of people's political ideology and them pushing down this wokeness on the military, which, disaster and conflict is an equal opportunist, and you should not be dividing a team that stands for the nation over your politics, over your culture and your ideology. Everybody's equal in the military.
I look where we are right now with, Russia, and it's not just Ukraine, but you've got the conflict there, which we're deep in it. I mean, that's basically us supplying the weapons, us supplying the rocks. I mean, that is basically a proxy war. You've got China, who is aligned with Russia, who has been building up their military for one purpose, to take down the other wolf, the top wolf on the hill. You've got Iran. We should be on absolute high alert. I see us on the verge. I don't even see us on the verge of World War III. I think World War III has already begun, just not kinetic here. And yet, when I look at our military that should be at its strongest ever, I can't help but say, do we have people in command of our military that are setting us up for failure? What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, it's true. I mean, there's a lot of talk in the culture of the military that we've lost our way. And I served under Obama, and I remember being a senior sniper at the time. I was a sergeant first class in E7, and I was probably mid-career, a little bit past mid-career. And I was deciding whether or not to commit long-term. And I said to myself, I remember saying to peers of mine, I remember specifically where I was even, that if Obama got elected, I probably wouldn't be in anymore, because I knew that our job was likely to be affected adversely because of politics. And when you're serving at a tactical level as a lower enlisted or an operator, for example, in special operations, you really don't deal with political drama that's going on above and beyond you. You have a job to do, and you're allowed to do that job. With Obama, actually, I think when he got in, he realized, or he turned coat and basically decided a lot of the things that he was going to stand for, he didn't, or maybe it was covert action and the ability to kind of not attribute himself or his administration to covert operations that were going on. We were allowed to do a lot of things. But for the first time now, we're realizing there's a potential for us to get further in harm's way in what I would think is the wrong way with our troops. We're pushing ourselves. 3 soldiers were killed on the Jordanian-Syrian border, a National Guard unit from Georgia, that were sleeping in their bunks, and they were killed because of our lack of really paying attention to what's going on in the region and throughout the military. And so we're putting these people out. The politics are driving initiatives, creating chaos, and then who's paying for it? The service members are paying for it. It's the same thing that happened in Lebanon when we had a suicide bombing that killed hundreds of people and a lot of troops. We're seeing that over and over again. So I think we're going to see it get a lot worse before it gets better.
Yeah, I think you're right.
And it just makes you wonder how vulnerable we are stateside if it were to come kinetic here, with how spread thin we are with both resources and personnel. Between Afghanistan leaving all that equipment behind, our presence in Ukraine, our presence in Gaza.
The ammunitions we've sent to Ukraine.
The money, I think we're paying for it in the personnel, but we also are paying for it. These wars are just taxpayer-funded, endless pits with how much money we've given to Ukraine. And they're both incredible resource that we can't give up, both money and our servicemen. And I think as this carries on, we're losing faith in our military and we're losing faith in our politicians at an equal rate. I mean, what do you think is happening, not just locally here in Utah, but this is more a national look at what's happening with this administration? I just think they're driving us into the ground.
Yeah, I mean, it's hard for me to look at what's happened in this country. We talk about the military. Well, what the first thing Biden did when he gets in, he turns off our ability to be natural energy independent, turn off our energy sources. You look what's happened to the dollar. I mean, with inflation, with sending billions, across to Ukraine and reckless spending across the world, our dollar's in trouble. We're not strong financially. You look at look at the civil strife, that's been driven in this country by the media and by these politicians, including policies that allow criminal activity to go unchecked. We are turning our streets into Gotham and putting the people at war with each other. And then you look at these policies of open borders, and literally we know there are terrorists coming through. Not to mention the Chinese nationalists that have been seen coming through. While we open those borders and we allow these people rush through, meanwhile, when you and I go to TSA, we're frisked. It is the utmost security, making sure that you and I are doing our part, that we're not doing anything wrong. You know what I mean? But even drive 10 miles an hour, you're someone's on your butt. But meanwhile, we have our country that's wide open, and I just have to say, let me ask you this: do you think this is just a series of coincidences of bad decisions? What do you think? What do you make of all this happening right now?
Yeah, the opportunities we have now to access information, like podcasts like yours, information like yours, where information is readily available if you find the right funnel for that information that's accurate and factual. So there's a double-edged sword there as well, because the mainstream media is still playing the manipulation game. Yeah. And the problem that we have is a lot of Americans have a feeling, and I think that feeling has materialized into tangible evidence of things being displaced and chaotic. An example would be the open border. I just did a little post and report about it on my show, talking about terrorists who are directly coming over. They just had a terrorist who came from Lebanon, who basically admitted that he was going to build a bomb maker from Hezbollah, and he was going to go to New York. Now, it's not often that a terrorist who comes across a border will say what his intent is, but also terrorists don't have the highest aptitudes. The smart ones don't communicate. And so if you have one that's saying he's going to build a bomb, and then he gets put into the Joint Terrorism Task Force kind of funnel where they're interrogating him and potentially deporting him, how many other people have gotten through? The governor this morning or last night, the governor of North Carolina, who's a good man, he basically put Biden on blast because they had a person of Yemen descent who was from Yemen through Haiti, winded up coming here illegally with a firearm. He had a firearm, and he was waving it and brandishing it around and assaulting police officers, and he got rolled up. And so people are paying attention, and a lot of the things that you're feeling can be backed with material evidence. So I don't think it's just an anomaly of ebbs and flows, how we go through cycles. We're definitely inbound to a fourth turning, and I believe all the things that are happening and manifesting themselves, we should pay attention to. And now that doesn't mean you should be fearful. That doesn't mean you should be scared or paranoid. That means you should be prepared. That means you should focus on your individual preparedness, your family's preparedness, and making your community stronger. And yeah.
Tell us about the fourth turning, because I think you're 100% right. There's a shift happening. The CBDC, AI, there is clearly a shift coming. When you said talk about the fourth turning, would you talk to our listeners about what do you mean by that?
Well, there's different formulations for the turnings of generations and the patterns of life that tend to ebb and flow. Right now, if you count every generation as 20 years, we're in the fourth generation of a 20-year cycle where we're going to basically collapse. We're in a period of time where we're going to hit rock bottom, except in this American experiment in the turning, that collapse could completely destroy us. And so most situations and circumstances like the Great Depression, and then having an industrial revolution, and then leading off into pushing into a war. Conveniently for us, that war in 1941 to 45 allowed us to get back to work, get back to a stronger economy. But we might not have that. We might not have the turnaround to get back to a generation which is likely our children, that is going to be set up for success. And so the idea right now is a lot of the things that you're seeing degrade are because we've expired. We've had it good for so long. Money was cheap. We're so free that now we're paying for it because we've gotten so complacent. And that's the problem with our society now is, I mean, why do you think culturally all of these things are manifesting themselves? We're paying attention to more about trans people in sports than we are just watching sports. In the 80s, when I grew up in the 80s and 90s, we were just watching sports. We were celebrating life and we were pretty happy. We were very analog. Now we're immersed with technology. We have access to disseminate information at a higher speed than ever before in human history, and now we're bored. And that boredom, which is leading to all these ideological issues, displacement from family, displacement from church and culture, Christian Judeo values is ending us up in a situation where we're about to be Rome and we're about to be the collapse of it.
Yeah.
Pre-World War II, Weimar Republic type days.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah. And you're seeing that more moral decay in society. Go ahead.
No, I just want to hit on that because I think people are so much concerned about what is happening right now with the border, with all these different pillars. And I think my question for you is, do you think these things are all just random decisions from an old man who's fumbling around in there, Joe Biden, or do you think, especially as a Green Beret, I mean, who has overthrown governments, who understands the pillars of society and what pillars need to come down to collapse a society, do you think that there is more to this than a rambling old man who's just making silly decisions?
Yeah, that's a good question. So the idea of a grand conspiracy is that people are invested in a deliberate plan. Maybe they sat down together and they, at some point, put their heads together, whiteboarded, chalked it up, and decided to, this is the plan, and then there's a point of execution. And then they're all on marching orders. They're just doing the thing. But the way that this is unfolded, because of Marxism, is when you plant a seed in the culture, that seed that manifests itself is the ideology. It manifests itself in behavior change. It manifests itself in policy change. And so you have an entire generation, which is Biden's generation. I mean, there are many congressmen and women and also senators, senior senators in the government that have been planted with this seed. If you grew up in any academic institution, especially Ivy League school in the 70s, post-Vietnam, then this was the ideology you were following. And so I don't believe it's a grand conspiracy that was chalked up, but I believe it's culture and ideology manifesting itself in decision-making, which is affecting the outcome of all the things that we're seeing. And so that's more dangerous because when you see something deliberate, you can campaign against it and you can say, I told you so, and then you could counter it. But when it's ideological, just like jihad is, just like Islamic revolutions are, you don't have the ability to affect outcome. That's why counterterrorism strategies and killing bad guys and as a single source, which I've done a lot of, is not the way that you strategically succeed because you won't win hearts and minds. Every terrorist you kill, that terrorist had a brother, had a son, and you're just making 3 terrorists, 4 terrorists, 5 terrorists. So the situation we're in now is we can't really manifest what it is. We just know it's wrong.
Yeah.
But it's definitely an ideological change. And the most similar thing that I've been confronted with in my military career is the fight against Islamic jihadists, extreme radical Muslims who believe in their faith, who believe in their cause, which I respect. But that has planted the seed throughout the region. And you have everything from a mullah and a Islamic center or a mosque preaching to children. That's affecting more of the outcome for their side than us killing bad guys. So that's scary. Yeah. It's an ideological revolution, and that's scary.
When you talk about the this generation and Biden's generation, it reminds me of the interview with Yuri Bezmenov. Have you heard that one?
Yeah, for sure.
Where he talks about how it takes certain many generations and how he talks about basically our grandchildren would basically be living under communist rule. And he literally said that there was a strategy to do that. And in fact, I'm going to play one of the clips here.
Ideological subversion. What do they mean by it?
Ideological subversion is the slow process which we call either ideological subversion or active measures, активные мероприятия in the language of the KGB, or psychological warfare. What it basically means is to change the perception of reality of every American to such an extent that despite of the abundance of information, no one is able to come to sensible conclusions in the interests of defending themselves, their families, their community, and their country. It's a great brainwashing process which goes very slow, and it's divided in 4 basic stages. The first one being demoralization. It takes from 15 to 20 years to demoralize a nation. Why that many years? Because this is the minimum number of years which requires to educate one generation of students in the country of your enemy, exposed to the ideology of the enemy. In other words, Marxism-Leninism ideology is being pumped into the soft heads of at least 3 generations of American students without being challenged or counterbalanced by the basic values of Americanism, American patriotism. The demoralization process in the United States is basically completed already. For the last 25 years, actually it's overfulfilled, because demoralization now reaches such areas where previously not even Comrade Andropov and all his experts would even dream of such a tremendous success. Most of it is done by Americans to Americans, thanks to lack of moral standards. As I mentioned before, exposure to true information does not matter anymore. A person who was demoralized is unable to assess true information. The facts tell nothing to him. Even if I shower him with information, with authentic proof, with documents, with pictures, even if I take him by force to the Soviet Union and show him concentration camp, he will refuse to believe it until he is going to receive a kick in his fat bottom. When a military boot crashes his balls, then he will understand, but not before that. That's the tragic of the situation of demoralization. The next stage is destabilization. This time, subverter does not care about your ideas and the patterns of your consumption. Whether you eat junk food and get fat and flabby, doesn't matter anymore. This time, and it takes only from 2 to 5 years to destabilize a nation, what matters is essentials: economy, foreign relations, defense systems. And you can see it quite clearly that in some areas, in such sensitive areas as defense and economy, the influence of Marxist-Leninist ideas in the United States is absolutely fantastic. I could never believe it 14 years ago when I landed in this part of the world that the process will go that fast. The next stage, of course, is crisis. It may take only up to 6 weeks to bring a country to the verge of crisis. You can see it in Central America now. And after crisis, with a violent change of power, structure, and economy, you have so-called the period of normalization. It may last indefinitely. Normalization is a cynical expression borrowed from Soviet propaganda. When the Soviet tanks moved into Czechoslovakia in '68, Comrade Brezhnev said, "Now the situation in brotherly Czechoslovakia is normalized." This is what will happen in the United States if you allow all these schmucks to bring the country to crisis, to promise people all kind of goodies and the paradise on earth, to destabilize your economy, to eliminate the principle of free market competition, and to put a big brother government in Washington, D.C., with benevolent dictators like Walter Mondale, who will promise lots of things, never mind whether the promises are fulfilled.
But I think there clearly is, put it this way, he was clearly right when you look at what's happening right now. So let me ask you this. I want to take a step back. And I want to focus a little bit on Mike Glover. Who is Mike Glover? If you could give kind of a little bit of a overview for our listeners. I think most people know who you are, and you've done a phenomenal job in what you've built and the things you've done. But for those who don't know, tell us about Mike Glover. Like, what's made you the man you are?
Yeah, I'm just a I mean, I would consider myself a small town kid. I'm the son of a service member who served in the Army. My dad was in the Army. He met my mother, who's Korean, when he was stationed in Korea. My uncle was in the Navy. My granddad served in the Army. My great-great-great-grandfather was General Hood, a Confederate general. On the other side,
blood.
it's in the blood.
Warrior blood.
Warrior blood.
And then John Glover, who was a colonel in the Revolution, was also a direct relative of mine as well. He actually paddled across the Potomac with Washington.
Oh my gosh!
And-
Really?
Yeah, and there's a statue of him in New Hampshire.
What's his name?
John Glover. Yeah. So some cool things that I grew up with, and we talked about it at the dinner table. But grew up very analog in the 80s and very simple and very poor. We didn't have a lot. My dad, after
Where'd you
that,
grow up?
I grew up in partly in Hope Mills, North Carolina, and partly in Port Orange, right outside of South Daytona. Okay. My dad was a corrections officer. My mom and him separated when I was real young. My mom was a entrepreneur. She turned her garage that was just dirt. She paved some concrete and put in a beauty salon, a one-stall beauty salon. Just retired after 40 years. It's selling a multi-million-dollar spa that took her 40 years to accumulate.
That's awesome.
But really grew up and knew what I wanted to do in the military. I wanted to be a Green Beret. My dad told me that was the hardest thing to do. And that was the best thing I could do for myself. So at 17, I joined the Army and had aspirations of being an airborne ranger. I didn't go to Ranger Battalion, but I did go to Ranger School as a young 19-year-old soldier, went to airborne school, did a whole bunch of cool stuff. And early on in my career, I learned about loyalty, duty, and all the Army values because I had the opportunity to try out to guard the Tomb of the Unknown Soldier. So I was a tomb guard, protecting the unknowns from World War I, World War II, Korea, and Vietnam, and did that for 2 years, all before 9/11. And then 9/11 changed, like many, the trajectory of my life. You know, after 9/11, I didn't join the Army to just wear a uniform or get a college degree or, you know, do something else. It was like I was joining the Army because that's what I wanted in life.
Warrior.
I wanted to fight.
Yeah.
And there was no fight going on, and I'm like, I'm getting out. But then 9/11 happened. I'm like, well, it's on. And I kind of very definitively knew my purpose. Right after 9/11, I went to Special Forces selection, and really the rest is history because I just spent from that time period, from 2002, going to selection during the invasion of Afghanistan, and then attending the Q course as a weapons specialist in the Green Berets. As soon as I got out of training, 2 weeks later, I was in Afghanistan. I spent 9 months in Afghanistan, and every year subsequent to that, all the way until 2016, I went to war every year. And so that was my goal. I did 9 rotations to war, 5 trips to Iraq, a couple to Afghanistan, went to Libya, went to Africa.
What was one of the wildest things you saw?
Saw a lot of wild. Every trip had its own unique experiences. I do tell a story about very specifically a dog from U.S. Army Special Operations Command named Vinny, who saved my life. He bit a suicide bomber about 15 yards in front of me, killed the dog, killed him, but saved me and another operator, Rob. And, you know, even reflecting on that kind of period in my life, I remember even specifically on that mission where the little birds were raining brass on us from the attack helicopter, using our point as a forward-friendly line, decimating bad guys on the battlefield. And I knew, man, this is exactly where I want to be. You know, I didn't know really anything else. And, you know, this is before social media, and I hate, a lot of people virtue signal about things, and so do I, but you didn't have anybody to virtue signal. You just did it for yourself, and you did it for your country, and you did it for your teammates. I had a really good run, and I went through all that experience, and at the tail end of my career, I got promoted really fast. I was a young team sergeant in charge of a sniper reconnaissance team. I deployed to Libya right after Benghazi in 2012. And then right after that, got recruited by the CIA. And kind of the path for an operator who serves in special operations, at least the guys that I hung around, was like that was the pinnacle of experience if you served in the Central Intelligence Agency because of our lineage.
Yeah.
And it's one of the best jobs I've ever had. I'm not a big fan of the Department of Justice and the FBI, but I'm a real big fan of the CIA because of the Special Activities Division, the Office of Security, the Directorate of Operations, Special Activities Division does a lot of hard work. One of the first casualties, actually the first casualty of the global war on terror was Mike Spann, who was a paramilitary operations officer for the CIA. And so I knew that early in my career, that's what I wanted to do. And so when I separated, I did serve as a global response staff officer, which for reference, it's the guys who responded to 13 hours in Benghazi. I was one of those guys and was going overseas, did 4 or 5 more rotations post my military experience. And then in 2016, decided to walk away and start my company, Fieldcraft.
Well, that's I'm all of a sudden feeling pretty insignificant with my life's accomplishments.
No.
But I mean, I have a cool dog. I guess got some cool stuff now. It's with everything that you've seen overseas and experienced coming to Utah. I don't know if you've had a similar experience coming here especially from the East Coast, also. But what did you expect when you came to Utah, and what's been the most surprising thing to see as you've lived here for the past? How long have you been here now?
I think 4 years.
Okay.
So the story of how I got to Utah, I've had a lot of friends here that moved here. I've actually done a lot of training here. Special Operations has a headquarters here in our backyard. And there's a remote section of this beautiful state that trains a lot of operators, because it looks just like Afghanistan. And had a lot of good times here. And I appreciate the values of the LDS, of the community, but also the environment. I mean, it's one of the most beautiful places on earth. And I've been everywhere. The most beautiful place I've ever been is Afghanistan, along the Hindu Kush mountains in northeastern Afghanistan. I spent nearly a year there, and it reminds me of that. And so there's a lot of feelings that come up of service, but also of freedom. Like I feel free when I'm here. And so I looked into it, and I've really looked into conservative values and where we stand as a state. And, I bought into it. I came here and moved my company here, employ a couple dozen full-time employees here, subcontract a lot more. And it's where I'm raising my family. The most surprising thing is talking to you guys about what's going on in our own backyard. But you're not pessimistic about it. You're realist about it, because if we don't talk about these things and you're not willing to address it now, we'll just be California. I mean, we potentially could be worse than California. And so there's a lot of people here believe in conservative values but don't know what's going on in their own backyard. That's the most surprising thing, which is why I'm here physically sitting with you, but also have a more vested interest, because I'm willing to stand my ground here. I don't want to go anywhere else. I was born in Fort Ord, California, in a military installation that no longer exists. When the state was ran by Ronald Reagan, I remember growing up, remembering it being a good state. And I have many friends there. I have many law enforcement officers that I've trained with and know. I don't want to see us become a third world country. And so I'm here locking it down with you guys and doing whatever I can to support and advocate for the truth.
So you've got 3 kids?
3 kids, yeah.
Tell us their ages.
2 twins, boy and a girl, 4.5 and a 6-month-old.
Okay.
Yeah.
So when you think about your kids, what is your biggest concern right now as you think about them?
Their future. I mean, all the things that I grew up in, I believed in because it was our national identity. You know, I grew up with military commercials that said, be all you could be. And Americans that were growing up with a September 10th mentality where they didn't need a disaster to reaffirm or realign their values. That's just who we were. We were focused on family units and breaking bread and building relationships. And then somehow, some way, with the help of mainstream media, the help of big corporations and big pharma, and the list goes on, technology certainly, we lost our way. And so I now am operating in what I would call human terrain. It's a different navigation consideration. It's more complex than operating in the most austere environments in the world. And I don't want my children growing up even potentially serving, depending on the status of where our government's at. And I never understood that because I have seen it. I've seen people and having distrust in the government, but I've never felt it, and now I feel it. And so I want my children to be independent. They will be homeschooled. They're being homeschooled now. I teach my kids preschool every day from 9 to noon, Monday through Thursday. And I will be focused on setting them up to be independent of systems because I don't want them to outsource anything. Well, we've done that too much, which is why we're in this situation we're in the first place.
No, I think that's incredible. And I think you have a lot of people following that, maybe not for the same reasons, but that trajectory here, homeschooling their kids especially. And when you talk about what we spoke about earlier about ideological change, you know, I wonder sometimes how that's going to look in Utah, especially when you have a generation of, you know, a good chunk of the state being homeschoolers, and you see what a difference it makes with the times we're in and also with the maturity levels of them interacting with adults. So it really, really affects the way they grow up. But when you have an infiltration through the border and all of the policies that are going, the wokeness and what have you, I wonder sometimes how that ideological change is going to look here in Utah. You go to France right now and parts of it, and even London, Sharia law is starting to take over. You know, could something like that happen in Utah, even in this, well, we know it's not as conservative red as we thought it was when we came here, but could something like that, could we be vulnerable for that systematic change?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, what it is like government institutions are most incentivized by getting the people to buy into their ideas. And government tries to build efficiency in people's lives. And, you know, I believe Ronald Reagan growing up as a child when he said, keep government out of my life, because government should be there to facilitate, not enable. And actually what they're doing is disabling our ability to be self-reliant for a lot of people. So the problem is you have governors, you have mayors, you have sheriffs, all buying into the idea of building efficiency, then you build dependence. It's why most crime takes place in epicenters focused on geographical dense populations of people, because the idea is, it's more efficient if if I'm a member of a tower of people stacked on top of each other. I don't know my neighbors, but I'm stacked on top of each other because I could commute and Uber or train or bus to work, and it's more efficient. Oh, and also if I'm in the city limits, then I get tax benefits or maybe handouts, maybe welfare, a paycheck, a cell phone, the list goes on. And so you have institutions breeding inner city grounds for this dependence. And then with that comes a culture with an ideology. If you just fast forward what that looks like, it looks like Chaz. It looks like what happened in Seattle, where you have a mayor so disaffected from reality, she emails the chief of police and tells her that you shouldn't enforce laws. In fact, unless it's a mass casualty, you will not enforce laws. And that chief, I give her credit for stepping down eventually, followed suit. And so you don't have the enforcement of laws. And then you have checkpoints, and then you have armed checkpoints. And then you have people being murdered and raped, which actually happened in Chaz. and then nothing's done about it. And so quickly kind of evolve what this Marxist ideology, communism, socialism looks like. It looks like Chaz. And so you want to be so free, so independent that you're basically tyrannical is what we're ending up being. And so I don't like the idea. I think the idea of government is to stay out of our way, respect the Constitution, and give us the liberty and freedoms to evolve as human beings. And when you take away that incentive, you strip a human being completely away from their ability to thrive. And so what we have is a survival system. And then what we have is a dependence on government. And then this is like a conundrum. It's a circling of the drain. And so my biggest fear is if you can go to your local city, Baltimore, Chicago, and downtown Salt Lake City, and you'll see it. Because what do you see in downtowns, in the epicenters? You see crime, you see drug overdoses at a record scale, you see homelessness, you see poverty, you see problems. And that is literally a symptom of what this dependence leads to.
There's something else you see in big cities, groupthink.
Yes.
Collective.
Yeah. My wife's from
Tribalism.
Yeah. My wife's from New York City, and it's so funny when we go back there. We don't go back there as much nowadays since COVID, but it is a group of people who think they are so worldly, and in a sense they are, but their thinking is so
Myopic.
Yes, they have no idea how the world really works, and they all think the same. And it is easy to control people in numbers. It's hard to control individuals.
Well, and then you layer in the schooling, the education system, especially public schooling. I mean, even here at BYU, when we do street interviews there, they're all but screaming for collectivism, communism, and all of these things that that don't make sense to an actually worldly educated mind that knows history.
Yeah, we met a few weeks ago with Natalie Klein. Tell me your thoughts when you met Natalie Klein and what she talked about what's going on here in Utah. What stuck out to you there?
Well, that everything she's saying makes sense to me. I mean, it's logical, it's reasonable, and the fear she has from a reasonable perspective is valid. I saw her news interview with one of the local stations, interviewing her about her mistake that she made, and I validate that's a mistake, and she apologized for that mistake. But I also validate the idea that you have somebody who's going against the grain in a system that is literally manipulating our children, and you need a person to go against the grain and just be a voice for reason. This isn't unreasonable. And so I'm glad that Natalie Klein exists. I don't know her that well, but everything I've seen from her and all of the alarming she's doing by just speaking up is what we need.
Yeah, someone on the inside of the school board who can see behind the curtain of what's actually happening. And it's amazing how, the school board turned on her, our state legislator turned on her, the governor turned on her, the lieutenant governor, who's supposed to stay out of things because she's in charge, oversees elections, started endorsing her opponent. I mean,
and the end goal is to have not just the school board members, but the attorney general and also prevalent positions. I think there was one or two more appointed by the governor.
Did you hear about that?
Yeah.
I mean, tell me your
Sean.
thoughts. Yeah, Sean. So where he basically extorted Sean Reyes to step down, who was very well liked and had a huge war fund. Basically, he wanted to have the attorney general appointed, and when the legislator, with good on them, says, no, that's not a good idea, obviously, then he goes ahead and extorts the sitting attorney general and says, either support my guy to get him in, or we're going to expose you.
Yeah, it's all high school games, except
Yes.
in this situation, the stakes are high, and people are really the end objective here is to basically create more control of the population. And so when you have tribalism like that and people being attacked for actually raising their hand and saying, hey, wait a minute, maybe we should free or critically think more about this, that's problematic, especially for the representation of people. Like the buy-in of constituents is that you are voting for a person who's going to represent your value, except when the people who don't represent your values are speaking for you, mostly out of turn, and you have nobody to fight for children in this case, that's very problematic. And that's why there needs to be an uprising. That's why we need to talk about these things, because we need discourse. If you don't have discourse, then you don't have perspective. And if you don't have perspective, then you can't weigh it, and you fall into collectivism, you fall into tribalism, and you fall into what's happening throughout the country, for example, with women's sports, where we somehow have completely disavowed women's rights that we fought so hard for, because we have nobody willing in a leadership position, or even as an informal leader, to stand up. Where you have athletes who are standing up and then getting basically canceled for standing up. I just did a post last night because I heard Caitlyn, formerly Bruce Jenner, talk about how he was an athlete and dominated the sport because he was a male, and he doesn't agree with trans people participating in women's sports. And if you just have a conversation about it, somehow you're a bigot, racist, or transphobic. I happen to not know anybody who's trans, but I have people who are gay in my family. My grandmother's brother was gay, and I went to his funeral I went to his partner's funeral when I was a child, and was like, what's going on here? But because we originate from Georgia, and because we are close-knit as a family, and we believe in love and empathy, and we have those values, he was just an uncle to me.
Yeah.
And so I post about it, I talk about it, and all of a sudden I'm transphobic or homophobic. And it's like, we can't even critically think through this, because it's easier just to jump on the bandwagon. And simply put, that's what's destroying our country.
Yeah. It's interesting because, we obviously, with what we do on Instagram and here, we're constantly calling things out and trying to stand up for what's right. And, one of the things that really motivate, because it's always this thing, do we keep going? Is it worth what we're doing? Is it worth just keep, especially when you get through some of the attacks you get. And we're in one of those points where we're like, is this really worth, keeping going? It was just very heavy at the time, what we were carrying. And I was at the gym, and some, young kid comes up to me and says, hey, are you Jason Pressman? And I'm like, yeah, I am. And he said, I just want you to know that what you're doing makes a difference. And I'm like, hey, thanks, man. He says, no. And then he paused for a second. He got literally, his eyes water up. And he says, everybody out there makes me out to be the bad guy. And he says, and you make me feel sane. And I think, that's the reality is society. And I thought about it. It's like, yeah, well, what about church? I'm like, no, when's the last time you hear people even at church dare talk about that these things are wrong? Their school teachers are pushing the agenda. The colleges are pushing the agenda. So where do these kids ever that feel like, there are only two genders? This my mind tells me this is how it is, and yet all the world is telling me I'm crazy. Where do they go to hear that? And that's why I just respect, and I think someone like you has such a huge impact. That's why I think people are there's a counter-cultural revolution happening right now where it's in the kids' DNA to rebel against the man, right? Like, it's in the 80s, it's always rebel against the man. I think the man has become this woke ideology, and there's so many these young kids that are being just pushed and pushed and pushed, and they're just had enough, and they're looking for leadership. And I think, to me, that's one of the reasons I'm very thankful for you, is because they're looking for men, and I will say men, to stand up and lead and not be afraid of the woke mob coming after him. And
well, I think that's the antidote to progressivism. I mean, you look at things like DEI, and it's so progressive that we've actually gone backwards with it, that we're actually imposing forced segregation because we're now making rights for colored versus whatever. So I think the antidote to these things, which honestly to me, whether it's the bathroom issues, the trans issues, the DEI, it feels like a massive distraction from important issues. Like, look over here, because don't pay attention to the fact that the economy and the country is crumbling and we're on the verge of kinetic war. But the antidote to all of that, which is just craziness going on, is powerful, influential voices like yours. I think that is the people, because we need people to look up to that can actually make us feel sane, break things down. Like, am I the only one thinking this is crazy? I'm maybe not a Republican, or maybe I'm not involved with politics, or maybe I don't know what's going on with my state, but I have someone out there that's a truth teller that's actually explaining things and making me feel like I'm not crazy. So I actually think that's the power of having the influence, is being able to distinguish the crazy progressive ideologies going on right now with just straight old-fashioned truth.
Yeah, I think everything you said is spot on. I mean, look, we're in the IO campaign. It's the Information Operations Campaign. And the interwebs and social media that was supposed to bring us closer together hasn't done so much. And so I think it's important for people to tell people how they feel. And I don't even know how I'm put in this position, but I know it does impact people's lives. And I think that's a responsibility. I think just like you have a burden or responsibility, and you accept that burden and you get up every single day and you pray to God that you're going to have the strength to get through it, because a lot of the times it sucks. That becomes a purpose. And I think that purpose is something that's very significant. And I think it's not done enough. And if it's just the influence of a small group of people that can affect their families, their communities, and that networks and spider webs, I think then it's worth it. And so I teach preparedness. That's the focus, but I also know that the things that are going on are a lot bigger than just preparedness. I mean, we're in a volatile time where there's going to be likely two sides to this.
Say more about that.
I
mean, this is what you do. I mean, I feel like we haven't even hit that.
Yeah. Just for context, like, professionally, my job was to take information, distill that information, create a plan of action to execute a specific mission set. Green Berets have 7 very specific mission sets. I'm very good at consolidating information and seeing patterns and then understanding how things will manifest themselves. It's not spiritual. It's not godly. It's very conscious. It's very deliberate, and it's very much a part of my military mind. I mean, I was 18 years old. I was 17 years old, actually, when I learned the 5-paragraph operations order on how to plan. Situation, mission, execution, command and signal, and service support. Like, my brain thinks that way. And so in November of right before COVID kicked off, I saw trends and started talking about pandemic. And I said, there's a potential here. And people were like, how is there a potential here, you fear-mongering person?
Get that a lot.
Yeah. And so I said, listen, I'm not selling you anything. I don't have a pandemic kit. But what I'm saying is, big picture, strategically, there's things going on, including the World Health Organization. Bill Gates just released a documentary. He's self-funded, and Netflix is pushing it. And that's a big deal, because all of those things are very difficult to do. He's obviously pushing an agenda. And what do you see on the horizon? Well, I see a pandemic on the horizon. And I was called crazy. And then 3 months later, actually, I was in Prescott, Arizona. And I was on social media, been on social media for years. And I just did like a selfie of me with a mask on. And it was in China. It started in China. And I put the mask on and I said, your new EDC. This will be your new everyday carry. And people were like, you're an idiot. They literally said, you're an idiot. And I said, trust me, this is going to change our world. And I went to 511 Tactical in Las Vegas, right outside of SHOT Show. I hosted an event. It was a first aid seminar, and everybody got sick. I actually came home, and I went to the hospital for the first time ever in my life over a illness, and they said, oh, this is probably H1N1. This is a flu. And then one of the nurses was like, wait, isn't there some flu that's in China? I was like, yeah, but you haven't been to China. And I'm like, well, SHOT Show is one of the biggest infiltration of Chinese nationals and CCP ever, because they go there to steal all the innovation in the tactical space and bring it back to their country. And so I was sick, and then all of these things started manifesting themselves. We are going to be in a situation where, very specifically, I think I did a video yesterday called Behind Enemy Lines. And the premise of that video is the feeling that I have now is the same feeling. And I go off feelings a lot, intuition. I trust that, but also backing it with some data points. When I was in Afghanistan, a remote fire base, I was surrounded by high ground, surrounded by bad guys. But I also felt I was in the most majestic place on the planet Earth. I was by the Konar River. I was looking at the surrounding mountaintops that looked like they could be Swedish villages in Europe. And at the same time that I had a feeling of, man, this is exactly where I need to be. This is amazing. I was also in the Wild West. I was also in a place where people were lobbing rockets at us nightly, trying to kill us, trying to ambush us. I'd say it's like a place where you can go into a village, you could give kids bottles of water, you could build rapport and shake hands and drink tea, and on the way out, you can hit an IED and everybody dies. So that same feeling I have where I felt like I was behind enemy lines is the same feeling I have now, where you're in a semi-permissive environment. Everything is good until it's not. But what's different is we have complete and utter infiltration of an unknown number of personnel that are in our country for nefarious reasons. I mean, there's lots of data. I don't want to bore you with all those points. But that is scary because I know if I was a foreign adversary, because Green Berets are good at playing the bad guy. We do course of action development. We war game. We strategize. And this military decision-making process happens in isolation, and we do it for weeks. I know doing a lot of contingency-based planning, if I was the foreign adversary, I would be infiltrating us through open borders, planting as many seeds as possible so that at my will, when I am inspired and motivated, I could activate all the bad guys that I want. And that activation of bad guys doesn't come in the form of deliberate attacks. It can be a deliberate attack. It could be the sporadic event, but it could be cyber hacks. It could be attacks on infrastructure. It could be campaigns in IO focused on creating divisiveness in the country. All those things, by the way, are happening as we speak. So my fear is we're taking, like you said, our eye off the ball because we're distracted. Because we care more about what's going on with the Kardashians than we do what's going on in our own backyard or within our U.S. government. Yeah. And so that's my biggest fear is most people aren't paying attention. And when you're not paying attention, you're ill prepared.
How concerned are you about 2024?
Well, actually, let me phrase that a different way. We have friends that are scriptorians. We have friends that study astrology. We have friends that are combat reporters in the field. They all sense through, whether it's research, intuition, spiritual gifts, that this is the year of pivotal change. Given what you experienced in pre-COVID 2019, early 2020, do you see those patterns developing for something pivotal this year?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, it's like it's a recipe for disaster. When you see all the acceleration of AI that is used to push the manipulation of people. I mean, the fact that people in the social dilemma are not paying attention to what social media, specifically Meta, TikTok, is doing to our children. And that's just kind of like we're shrugging that off, where the Chinese actually limit and restrain their own citizens, including their children, from not seeing. I mean, there's hours of operation for TikTok of access where they completely lock it out. There's science, mathematics, arithmetic, perspective, giving and driven to children versus what we do in an open market, open free market, is we just take all of it and we're completely manipulated. I knew this was happening early on in civil unrest under Obama when we were seeing these peaceful protests taking place and they were burning down cities. In Atlanta, Georgia, where 50% of the businesses in Atlanta, Georgia are African-American owned, white people representing black people were burning down black business, where the mayor of Atlanta was coming out saying stop, where Killer Mike, a rapper, was literally telling people to stop. It's like, oh, so why is this happening? Well, because Twitter, which was out of control at the time, was being manipulated, and people, whether they were foreign adversaries or domestic adversaries, were pushing people to hit the streets. And that was coordinated. It wasn't, they didn't have to coerce these people. They wanted to fight. They just facilitated the fight. And so what you're going to see is that times 100. Because this year with the technology, I mean, last night I was working with subtitles for a book I'm writing with AI. And I prompted it through a voice memo on ChatGPT-4. And I study prompting because prompting is the recipe to manipulate the AI to spit out the most effective information. And I had 30 top-tiered subtitles in seconds based on about 10 minutes of very deep in the weeds complex prompting, where these things are like New York Times best-selling subtitles. And at the same time, I could have conversations with the voice of, her name's Sky. That's actually one of the voices, where I say to Sky,
Skynet.
Okay, I say, Sky, I want to talk to you, but I want you to talk normal because I want to podcast you, and I'd like you to be a podcast guest. Well, I don't know. I don't really do that. And I was like, I want you to do it. I think this would be really good, and I want to talk about the world falling apart. And she changed. She said, awesome. Let's do that. I think I could be pretty chill. Let's figure that out. And so all of these things merging, I hate to quote Malcolm Gladwell, but at a tipping point, what you see at a tipping point is all things emerging and then hitting a crossroad. And then when it hits the tipping point, it falls back on the backside of that scale and it's unrecoverable. I feel like we're at that moment. And the further and closer we get to the election cycle, I think it's 75% of Democrats said when polled that if Trump won, they wouldn't believe the results of the election. That probably is exactly the same on the other side, if not more. So no matter what, we have a massive mistrust of government, of institution, and then no matter what happens at the election cycle, that's not the pinnacle. That's not the crossroad. In fact, that might be the start point of this disaster.
Wow.
And then you layer in things like predictive programming, stuff, information warfare, propaganda, which we talked a bit about earlier today. You know, you turn on Netflix and you're seeing the Obama-produced, I forget what the show is, the one about the EMP that goes off, which is another viable threat to some scale. Civil war shows, you know, again, predictive programming. Bill Gates coming and the self-funded productions that he does. I mean, they're all but telling you right now what their playbook is for what they want to roll out on us.
Let me ask you a question. I think we're coming short on time. Unless you have another question. I know you have a lot of youth that follow you. If you have a message for the youth, you know, who are following you or who are watching this, what message would you want to give to them?
Yeah, if it's young children or
like college.
young men.
Yeah, college.
Young men, young women. I know it's kind of a stereotype, kind of a line as an analogy. I talk about this often, like the oxygen mask that comes out of the aircraft when you depressurize and you lose oxygen in the cabin. You need to grab that and help yourself before you can help others. So you have to be a healthy, well, and confident human being, a person, in order to start a family unit. But your purpose is a family unit. I don't care really what institutions in government that I lack control of are really doing. I think it's important, both from an ideological perspective and an informed perspective, to understand what's happening. But I think it's more significant to allocate your time to being a better human being and also building a family unit. Most young people don't know their purpose actually exists in procreating with a woman or man they love and developing an interpersonal relationship with people to develop tribe and community. And so if you don't know, I'll help you with that, because I think it's something that's lost on a lot of people, because the concept or the idea, depending on the school of thought or the family or lack of family you grew up in, is we will get it out of our system before we decide to commit, to develop a personal relationship with somebody. When you don't have purpose, when you don't have a mission, I had a mission. It was to fight. I knew with a September 11th mindset that September 12th, I was going to be kicking off and going to war. That was my purpose. If I didn't have that purpose, I'd be lost like everybody else. But I would redefine myself and find purpose in starting a family, building that. And when you build strong family units, you build strong community. And so if you're not focused on that, you should be. That's the best advice I could give you. And I would tell you, all the things that you're manipulated into thinking, be a critical thinker, think outside the box, as a good Green Beret would tell you. Because when you're a square peg in a round hole, you're able to see things that other people can't see. And in that collectivism and that tribalism, you're able to be the informer, the leader. And you don't have to be a designated leader in a leadership position. You could be an informal leader. They're the most important roles in our society. Lastly, you don't have to be a Green Beret. You don't have to be a special operator to serve. Because serving your family, your God, your neighborhood, your community is just as significant as a purpose and mission in life. So that would be the best advice I could offer.
Okay, I got one more for you. We do have a lot of men that follow this too. We have it's interesting demographic, and I actually really like the demographic, because I think if you're going to change a country or a community, you need men to stand up and lead, and you need the youth. The youth. I mean, all tyrants have known throughout time, you control the youth, you control the future. So to the men who watch this, and not to diminish the women, because we have incredible women too, but I think all the women are concerned about the men. What advice
for them to step up?
Yes. What advice, if you can give some advice to the men watching this, what advice do you have for them?
Yeah, your will and your adapted by nature to fight, and you have a will to fight. Accept that reality. Women, accept that of your men. Read Untethered Soul too. That's a good book to read about men and their position in life. What you do with that is going to determine your outcome. A lot of people who have the fight in them, men specifically, all have the fight in them. How they allocate that is going to set your end goal and objective. There's a reason why people who are disproportionately disconnected from fathers, from family units, end up in prison or end up in a justice system in some way, especially as juveniles. If you have the ability because you grew up in a good home, or you don't, take that fight and allocate it in the right direction. Do jujitsu, serve your country, join the Peace Corps, fight for your family. Be a first responder. Be the best that you could be at whatever you're doing. A lot of us want to kind of degrade this masculinity and call it bad. It's good. It's actually serving a very distinct purpose. Most men who haven't accepted that reality are lost. And then you reallocate that energy in wrong things. You're addicted to pornography. You're addicted to drugs. You're addicted to alcohol. When I was in my teens and 20s in the military, I never drunk one drop of alcohol. I never went to bars. I never chased women. And the reason I didn't, not because I didn't want to be cool like the cool guys, but I remember distinctly walking down the hallways of our dorms or barracks, putting on a rucksack and walking by all the men who were chugging, probably Bud Light at the time, but they were chugging Bud Light, about to go out to the club in their best dressed collared shirts. And they were like, "Where are you going?" "It's Friday night, man. We're going out." I'm like, "I'm not going out. I'm going out to ruck because I'm going to get better." And I remember their gaze and how they hated me, but they were also jealous because that's where they wanted to be. But they didn't have the discipline nor the control in their lives to do that for themselves, because I was one mission focused and I wanted to be the best soldier and operator that I could be. And I took that very seriously. I'm not saying that because I think that people who drink or people who go out are bad. What I'm saying is when you want something, you attack it head on. And so don't be afraid to do that, to drive towards goals and objectives, but never neglect this thing called tribe with interpersonal relationships, because that is what's going to keep you. When it's all said and done, unfortunately, in my situation, post the military experience, I came home to nothing. I didn't have anybody. And just like many men in special operations, I lost it all. My personal life degraded because I didn't keep my family together. I've learned that lesson, and I'll never let that happen again.
I love it.
Yeah,
I love
so
it.
inspiring.
Alexia?
No, I just want to know where can people find you if they want to listen to more of your podcasts or learn about fieldcraft survival.
Fieldcraftsurvival.com. We have an app for education. You guys could, wherever apps are found, find that content. And then I have a show on my personal YouTube, Mike Glover Actual, where I do 1 to 2 shows a week on the subject matter of being better prepared. You can find me wherever podcasts are found. My personal podcast is Mike Force Podcasts. I just podcasted Jason, so that'll be out in a few weeks. But yeah, I'm Googleable.
Don't Google us. You won't. No, I'm just kidding.
You know, Mike, I just appreciate you. I appreciate what you're doing, the impact you're having. And, you know, I believe that we do live in, and I'm a spiritual person, and I believe we are living in biblical times. I think you see the world spiraling right now, and it is clearly where we are coming into pivotal times. And I'm a firm believer that the men that were living in America when during the Revolutionary War times, I do believe that they were inspired and sent for such a purpose. I think it was some of the best men that God could find under the heavens, and that they were brought together for the purpose of creating this country. And you look at the good that's come. When they started that revolution, we had, after 5,000 years of living on this earth, had progressed to a horse and plow. Their ideology was that if we can set up a form of government that treats each man like a king and protect his God-given rights, and we stay out of the way and allow each individual to express their divine potential, it'll create a world like this world has never known. And in a short period of 200 years, sure enough, we all live greater than any emperor could have ever imagined. And again, I believe those men were sent for such a time. And now you look across when literally we are seeing this great nation and everything that these founding fathers stood for, their statues being torn down, and the history of this country trying to be rewritten, our borders being erased, and law and order collapsing. I happen to believe that God sent another crop of men and women equal to the task to stand up and preserve that. And you know, you said something that really stuck out to me as you know, when you were in the Army and the men were getting all dressed up to go out and party, you were focused on your mission, and you were focused on preparing for war. And I guess my parting message, I'll read this quote from Ronald Reagan. He says, "Freedom is never more than one generation away from extinction. We didn't pass it on to our children in the bloodstream. It must be fought for, protected, and handed on to them to do the same." And, you know, to the men and women out there, you know, you guys see the artwork we have here, or the artwork that Scott Travis did with us with the little girl, innocent with the balloons and the tanks rolling down. I see a very clear analogy between where you were in, you know, staying on track and preparing for battle to where we are now. War is coming. And whether that's kinetic or whether it's spiritual or whether it's, you know, a war for the freedoms of our children, you know, are at our schools and, you know, with the corruption in this country and in our state. You know, I hope our listeners will, you know, take that from, you know, Mike Glover and you know, where are you in your preparation for battle? Because I will tell you, if you're expecting a president to come rescue you, if you're expecting someone else who's going to preserve your children's freedoms, that's not happening. Your children, these children are depending on us to stand up and preserve it. And so I would just encourage, you know, you and our listeners to think about that. You know, why are you here? What is your mission? What role do you have to play in this, the great battle that clearly we've talked, everyone senses is coming, and we're in the middle of it. We're already in the middle of it. And I just encourage you to probably do the same thing you did. I imagine, you spent a lot of time thinking about your purpose when you were and the type of man you wanted to be and the type of soldier you wanted to be. And you had meditated on that and then sought to become that. And I'll ask our listeners to do the same thing, as I will tell you, you're needed in the fight. You are desperately needed in the fight. And, we are going to win, but it's going to be because people like you and I and Mike and Alexi and the good men and women out there start standing up and fighting for what we have let go of for too long in this country, which is our responsibility to preserve those rights for our children. But anyways, Mike, you're a freaking stud, dude. We appreciate you. Look forward to being in the battle with you moving forward, because I believe this battle hasn't even begun, and I believe it's a battle that matters, and I believe that God put all of us on this earth, many of us on this earth, for this fight, and I don't think we're gonna, and I know we're not gonna lose. So, to our listeners, please check him out. Please follow him if you want to get, and I highly recommend you go to Fieldcraft Survival. They have classes. There's plenty of ways that you can learn to be more prepared for the future, regardless of whether or not anything happens. But I mean, the fact of the matter is, it's almost a level of naivety not to see the writing on the wall that things are spiraling. So check them out, get prepared, and stand up, speak truth. Don't be afraid to say what's right, and share content with your neighbors. And again, the fight for freedom begins in your backyard. Our ability to make impact in DC is so small, but your ability to make a difference in your backyard is massive. And you happen to live in a state that needs you in the fight. You happen to live in a state that I believe is ground zero. And so thank you for being in the fight. God bless you guys. God bless America, and God bless Utah.